You're sitting there, you're still in shock, and the first question that hits you is, what now? You've lost someone that you love, and within hours, sometimes minutes, you're getting calls from insurance, the police, and maybe even the other driver's lawyer. And if you don't know your rights in that exact moment, the choices that you make could cost your family everything. Hi, I'm Ted Spaulding. I'm a wrongful death attorney here in Georgia, and I've spent over 20 years helping families navigate this exact moment. This video walks you through exactly what really happens in the hours and days after a fatal crash, and what you need to do to protect your family and the case from the very beginning. So you're not left guessing, not left unprepared, and not left with nothing. The first thing that you need to know is that Georgia is still a fault-based state, even in a what's called wrongful death situation, which is this one, a car wreck that has killed a loved one. That means that the person who caused the accident is responsible for the damages, the medical bills, the lost wages, the car repairs, all of it. It seems simple, but you still have to prove they are at fault. Most people assume, especially rear-end car wrecks and things of that nature, that they're always at fault. Well, no, that's not true, especially when it's a wrongful death case, right? Because we're often talking a massive case value-wise, because we're talking the loss of a loved one, and insurance companies therefore are going to pull out all the stops to try to protect their assets from a large verdict. So you might get a bigger fight over who's at fault. Well, the deceased suddenly stopped and therefore created a dangerous situation. My client had no way of being able to slow down. You get these sorts of things, or that they had broken tail lights, or they're the ones that ran the red light, or did an improper U-turn. All of these things can come up. You ultimately have to still prove fault. So you got to remember that. Georgia's not going to say, hey, wrongful death, especially like a rear end collision, they're at fault, no worries. You may be in for a bigger fight than you think you are. To piggyback, my next kind of flag, if you will, be careful on in these cases is don't necessarily solely rely on the police report. I've seen that backfire in the past. Oftentimes it won't, but again, you've got to be fully prepared, especially in a case of this magnitude. You got to remember the police officer showing up afterwards. The report may not be completely accurate. The officer may be relying on statements from people who often are shaken, they're injured, confused, or even worse, trying to protect their own interest, right? If the report seems wrong or incomplete, you don't want to ignore it. You can ask for corrections to it or include your own statement. Why does that matter? Because insurance companies treat the police report as if it is the end-all be-all. And again, I get it because oftentimes it is, but I can tell you, and I've one example, in Savannah, we had a trucking wreck case actually with a motorcycle. And the police actually found our client at fault. He was on the bike, saying that he went into oncoming traffic to avoid the truck, and that's when he was hit. Well, we were able to prove, we got with the police officer, he admitted he was just going off of the truck driver because he couldn't talk to the motorcyclist, and the truck driver gave him this story. We were able to find a witness and kind of break that apart, and then ultimately get with the officer, and him being a very good officer said, yeah, you're right. I no longer rely on my report. It now does sound like the truck driver's at fault, not your motorcycle client. So again, you can't fully rely on the police report in these situations. The next thing that I want you to know in these wrongful death car wreck cases is how Georgia law works when it comes to fault. So we talked earlier, you got to prove fault. Well, what do you have to prove? Well, Georgia is a modified comparative fault state. What does that mean? Well, that means that if your loved one is 50% at fault or more for the wreck, then the family receives 0, okay? Because that is too much fault, and the law says, in essence, the deceased individual is the main at-fault party. Now, the opposite is also true, which is if your loved one is less than 50% at fault, but some fault is still put on them, the family can still recover. It's just reduced by the amount of fault. So in more typical scenarios that I see, there can be some arguments that, oh, maybe they could have done this or that, right? Maybe they could have seen the vehicle, avoided it, these sorts of things. And we're going to put 10% fault on the deceased for the wreck. Well, you then get the value of the case, the verdict, minus 10%. So that's how that works. It's comparative fault. So what you need to know is, even if you're ultimately getting a police report that seems to indicate there were some things that your loved one might have done wrong, you do not want to assume that means you're completely out of luck. You want to get that to a lawyer to look at to see, are we talking it's so bad it's going to be probably 50% or more placed on your loved one, or is it just a little bit of fault is going to be placed, and therefore you still have something that can be pursued. Now let's talk about, how do you protect yourself? My recommendation is you start gathering evidence as soon as possible. If it's not by hiring a lawyer right away, do it yourself. Now here's what matters in Georgia in these cases. You want photos and videos of the scene. You want dash cam footage if it exists. You want video footage of the wreck itself if there are businesses or homes that have door ring cam, any of those sorts of things. You want witness names and phone numbers. You want to get witness statements if you can. You want to take notes of what you understand happened, if that is something that you even know at this point. Repair estimates are important. You'll be getting those. Medical records, if your loved one survived and went to the hospital before passing away, you want to get those medical records. Any citations that were issued, and then the ultimate outcome of those citations are very important as well. If you can collect these early, do it. Please, please, please. Because when it comes down to fighting over what we just talked about with fault, you don't want it to be a he said, she said type situation. Because guess what? Unfortunately, you don't have your loved one here to defend themselves. You want to be able to gather this evidence so you can show that the other party is at fault. So talking fault, I ultimately am asked oftentimes in various situations, well, who do you think is going to be found at fault, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go through a few of those. Rear end collisions, obviously, typically are the easiest ones because 99.9% of the time it's going to be the party hitting the other that is going to be found at fault in those situations. Again, unless there is sudden braking that is extreme, to be honest with you, or no brake light type situation, it's going to be rare that you're going to find fault in 50% plus fault, remember, on the vehicle in front, the one that got rear-ended. Left turns. The turning driver is usually at fault in left turn situations, unless speed is an issue or running of a red light is an issue. Typically, it's the left turn driver that's at fault. Intersection crashes. These sometimes the more difficult ones because it becomes he said, she said. They can go either way. It comes down to witnesses, traffic cameras, cameras at businesses around, or if you get lucky and there's dash cam, because there's oftentimes a he said, she said on who had the light. Multiple car pileups, fault can be shared among multiple parties for sure. Who braked late, who followed too closely, who was the first in the chain to cause everything. They're typically the one you're looking at. Then everyone after, why didn't you stop in time? Those can become a little bit more complicated. Parked car accidents, believe it or not, I get a number of these. If you hit a legally parked car, you're probably at fault, obviously. That's pretty standard stuff, unless the car was parked illegally. So we've had some of those scenarios where they're sticking out too far, right around a corner of a building or something like that, and someone strikes the vehicle. Believe it or not, those types of cases do happen. The bottom line of all of this is every accident is unique. Don't let anyone tell you that, oh, automatically it's so-and-so's fault. No. Get with a lawyer if you need to and have them review the case and see what they think about fault. Don't just assume. Now, you want to remember insurance companies move fast, and they do so for a reason, especially in these what we call wrongful death cases. After a crash, the other driver's insurance company, they may call you very fast, sometimes within hours. They sound friendly. They're trying to be helpful. They're so sorry for what happened, and they probably truly are. At the end of the day, their only job is to protect the company, the insurance company's money, assets. So they're not here to do you any favors. And what they typically will do is they'll ask you for a recorded statement. They'll try to get you subtly to admit some blame for what happened. The other thing they may do is a fast settlement. So here's what I tell people to do. Don't admit fault. Don't really even talk to them about the scenario. Tell them, police report, look at it. We may be hiring somebody, that sort of thing. Don't sign anything, and certainly don't guess or speculate. If you don't know, you don't know. And don't speak to them without legal guidance. Please, it's very, very important. Now, when might you need a lawyer, and why would you need them fast in a case like this? Well, for reasons we just talked about. This is going to move quickly. There's a lot at stake. Nothing is given. Fault all the way to injuries and the ultimate death and everything else. You cannot assume this is going to be easy. The other driver may change their story. The police report may not be completely correct. You might get gamesmanship by the insurance companies because there's so much at risk. And when you need the help, you need to call a lawyer so they can give you proper advice. We can help you. We can look into all of these things and help you ultimately resolve this type of case. But you got to do it early. I'm telling you, you don't want to wait too long. Evidence goes away, and assuming things early and then waiting is the worst thing that you can do to help protect your family. All right, let me give you a quick recap of what we've learned here. So one, we know fault in Georgia decides everything, and it may not be given. 51% at fault, you get nothing. And again, it's even more than 51. It's 50-50 and more. You're not getting anything. Police reports can be wrong. Don't worry if they are. You can get the evidence you need to prove what's wrong. And again, you can ask for corrections. Insurance companies are not on your side. Your words and your evidence can make or break your case. So be very careful doing any of that without legal guidance, much less legal representation. And therefore, don't wait to get legal help. Even if it's just calling a lawyer to see what they think and to give you some advice, don't necessarily have to hire them. Now, ultimately, here is a twist that most people don't see coming. Even if the other driver is clearly at fault, what if they don't have insurance or not enough insurance to cover your losses, which is a big issue in these wrongful death cases? That's where people can get completely blindsided. So in the next video, I'll show you exactly what to do in that situation and how to protect yourself before it even happens. So click now to watch. It could save you thousands of dollars and a whole lot of stress.